The history of Ukraine is vast, stretching from prehistoric times through modern history. Kyivan Rus eventually fragmented, facing Mongol invasions in the 13th century that left the core region devastated. During the interwar years, Soviet policies, including forced collectivization, led to the Holodomor, a famine that killed millions in Ukraine. World War II saw both Nazi occupation and Soviet influence, with divisions among Ukrainians, some resisting both Germany and the USSR, others collaborating with the Nazis. In recent decades, Ukraine's path has been shaped by its relationship with Russia and aspirations toward European integration. The 2013 Euromaidan protests sparked the Revolution of Dignity, ending with the ousting of President Yanukovych, who favored closer ties with Russia. In 2014, Russia annexed Crimea, sparking the ongoing Russo-Ukrainian War, which escalated in 2022 with a full-scale invasion. This conflict has reshaped Ukraine's modern identity, galvanizing both national unity and support from the international community in its fight for sovereignty. In the 7th century, the region of modern Ukraine was central to Old Great Bulgaria, a powerful Bulgar state with its capital at Phanagoria, near the Taman Peninsula. The Bulgars, a sophisticated, semi-nomadic people, established a society known for its military organization and control over the northern Black Sea region. The remaining territory was absorbed by the Khazars, who subsequently founded the Cossack Khaganate, a powerful state known for its religious tolerance and adoption of Judaism. This Khaganate played a major role in Eastern European trade, fostering a period of stability called Pax Khazarica that allowed commerce and cultural exchanges across Eurasia. By the 9th century, the Slavic state of Kyivan Rus began to emerge. According to the chronicle, Varangian leader Oleg seized control of Kiev, creating a political center for East Slavic tribes. The reigns of Igor and Olga marked significant developments in early Kyivan Rus. His widow, Princess Olga, avenged his death, subdued the Drevlins, and reformed the tribute system. She was also the first Kievan ruler to embrace Christianity during a visit to Constantinople, though her state remained predominantly pagan. Vladimir the Great's reign is often considered the golden age of Kyivan Rus. Under Vladimir, the state expanded significantly and became one of Europe's largest territories. Vladimir centralized his authority by abolishing tribal autonomies and converted Kyivan Rus to Eastern Orthodox Christianity, a momentous cultural shift. His establishment of church institutions and reforms secured the influence of Christianity, integrating it deeply into Rus society. Yaroslav also used marriage diplomacy to form alliances, leading to a period of relative stability and prosperity. The Council of Lubech in the late 11th century formalized this division, allowing princes to govern independently. After his son Mstyaliv's rule, the territory fractured further, leading to the rise of autonomous states like the Novgorod Republic and the Kingdom of Ruthenia. This fragmentation marked the decline of a unified Kyivan Rus, setting the stage for the development of distinct Eastern Slavic cultures and political entities. The Kingdom of Galicia-Volhynia emerged from the collapse of Kyivan Rus, continuing its political and cultural legacy. Initially, the region was divided into two principalities, Volhynia and Galicia, each ruled by different dynasties. The region faced internal rivalry until Roman the Great successfully united the two principalities in 1197, briefly extending his authority over Kiev. This unification laid the foundation for the Kingdom of Galicia-Volhynia, a powerful political entity in the region. After Roman's death, his son, Daniel Romanovich, reclaimed the throne and restored the kingdom in 1238. Despite the devastation brought by the Mongol invasions in 1240, Daniel secured victory in the Battle of Yaroslavl in 1245, which ended internal conflicts. To maintain autonomy, Daniel recognized Mongol supremacy but sought to break free from their control by seeking alliances with Western Europe. In 1253, he was crowned King of Ruthenia by Pope Innocent IV, symbolizing the kingdom's Christian alignment with Western Europe. During his reign, Daniel established key cities such as Lviv and Kholm, enhancing both economic and political stability. Following Daniel's death in 1264, his son Lev Danilovich succeeded him, ruling from 1269 to 1301. Lev continued his father's policies, defending the kingdom against Mongol invasions and reinforcing ties with Poland and Lithuania. Despite these efforts, the kingdom's power gradually diminished due to the constant pressure from the Mongol Golden Horde and internal challenges. Lev's death led to a weakened kingdom under his son, Yuri Lvovich, whose reign, 1301 to 1308, saw limited stability before the kingdom entered a period of fragmentation. The final years of the kingdom were marked by a lack of strong leadership. After Yuri's death in 1323, the kingdom was divided among his sons, Andrew and Lev II, but their attempts to maintain unity failed. By 1340, the last ruler, Yuri II Boleslav, faced significant challenges, including tensions with the local Orthodox nobility due to his Catholic background. His reign ended in his assassination, and shortly after, Galicia was annexed by Poland, while Volhynia came under Lithuanian control, bringing an end to the independent kingdom of Ruthenia. In the centuries that followed, the region became part of various empires, including Poland and Lithuania, which sought to dominate the former kingdom's territories. The rise of the Crimean Khanate and the increasing influence of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the 16th century brought about a series of social and political changes. The Polish colonization and Polonization of Ukraine led to tensions with the local population, particularly the Cossacks, who sought autonomy. These struggles, driven by cultural and political oppression, would culminate in the Cossack uprisings, setting the stage for the region's further transformation in the early modern period. In the 16th century, the Ukrainian territories were divided into several voivodeships, each with its distinct geographical size and population. Galicia, the largest of these, covered 45,000 square kilometers and had a population of 446,000, while Volhynia spanned 42,000 square kilometers and housed 294,000 people. Other regions like Podylia, Bratslav, and Kyiv had varying sizes and populations, with Kyiv being the largest in terms of area at 117,000 square kilometers, but having a population of only 234,000. These voivodeships were part of the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth, with the Cossack-dominated regions like Podlasia and Kholm witnessing varying degrees of autonomy and political influence. The 17th century saw the rise of the Cossack Hetmanate, a self-governing Cossack state that emerged following the 1648 Khmelnytsky uprising against Polish rule. However, the Hetmanate's independence was short-lived, as it soon entered into the Pereyaslav Agreement with Tsardom of Muscovy in 1654, seeking protection from the Russian Empire, which ultimately led to increased Russian influence. The Treaty of Andrusovo in 1667 marked the formal division of Ukraine between Polish and Muscovite territories along the Dnieper River. While the Hetmanate retained a degree of autonomy in the left bank regions, its sovereignty was increasingly undermined by external powers. Throughout the late 17th century, Ukraine endured continuous warfare, internal strife, and foreign interventions, which weakened the Hetmanate. The political landscape shifted further with the defeat of Hetman Petro Doroshenko, and parts of Ukraine fell under Turkish and Polish control, despite ongoing Cossack resistance. Cultural and intellectual developments in the Hetmanate were significant, as Ukrainian scholars contributed to reforms in Russian society, particularly during the reign of Peter the Great. The Kyiv Mohyla Academy produced important figures like Theophan Prokopovich, who played roles in the religious and cultural reforms in Russia. However, the annexation of the metropolis of Kyiv by the Moscow Patriarchate in 1686 symbolized the increasing integration of Ukrainian religious life into Moscow's orbit, weakening the Hetmanate's cultural autonomy. The Cossack Hetmanate reached its peak under Hetman Ivan Mazepa, who, during the Great Northern War, sought to break free from Russian control by aligning with Sweden. However, his rebellion culminated in defeat at the Battle of Poltava in 1709, marking the end of the Hetmanate's independence. By 1764, under Catherine the Great, the office of the hetman was abolished, and the Hetmanate was formally dissolved. Despite this, the legacy of the Cossack state continued to influence Ukrainian national identity and Russian political life. The late 18th century saw the liquidation of the Zaporozhian Sich, a symbol of Cossack independence. Following the Treaty of Kukuk-Kaynarka, which granted Russia control over the Black Sea region, the Russian Empire no longer required the Cossack defense of these territories. In 1775, Russian forces destroyed the Sich, exiling the Cossack leadership and scattering their population. The destruction of the Sich marked the end of the Cossack era, symbolizing the loss of Ukrainian autonomy. Meanwhile, in the west, the Habsburg-controlled region of Galicia experienced a different trajectory, with a growing Ukrainian intellectual movement that would later influence the national revival. By the end of the 18th century, much of Ukraine had fallen under Russian control, extinguishing the centuries-long struggle for independence. The Ukrainian War of Independence, 1917–1922, occurred in the aftermath of World War I and the Russian Revolution, which destabilized the region and led to multiple competing claims for Ukrainian sovereignty. Ukraine found itself embroiled in complex conflicts between various factions, including nationalist, socialist, and Bolshevik groups, as well as external powers. A number of states emerged, such as the Ukrainian People's Republic, UPR, the West Ukrainian People's Republic, WUPR, and several Soviet-aligned entities, each with differing visions for Ukraine's future. The period was marked by intense ideological and territorial struggles, alongside foreign interventions from Poland, Russia, and other powers. The UPR was established on November 20, 1917, amid the turmoil of the Russian Revolution, initially seeking autonomy within a federated Russian state. However, as the political situation in Russia deteriorated, the UPR declared full independence in January 1918. The UPR faced internal divisions and external threats, primarily from the Bolsheviks, who sought to bring Ukraine under Soviet control. The ensuing battles, particularly with Bolshevik forces, created a chaotic and unstable environment for the nascent republic, which struggled economically and militarily. Simultaneously, the Bolsheviks launched their own attempts to establish Soviet power in Ukraine, forming entities like the Ukrainian People's Republic of Soviets. This led to the creation of the Ukrainian Soviet Republic, which was aligned with Soviet Russia. The Bolsheviks' efforts to secure Ukraine, including a series of military campaigns, resulted in intense fighting against the UPR and other factions. By 1918, after the collapse of the Bolshevik forces in the region, the Ukrainian Soviet Republic was dissolved, contributing to the fragmentation of Ukraine's political landscape. However, his authoritarian policies and reliance on foreign support alienated many Ukrainians, leading to his downfall by December 1918. Meanwhile, in the western part of Ukraine, the West Ukrainian People's Republic, WUPR, emerged in 1918 following the collapse of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. This new republic was soon embroiled in conflict with Poland over control of eastern Galicia, culminating in the Polish-Ukrainian War. Despite attempts at unification, including the January 1919 Unification Act, which merged the UPR and WUPR, the two entities struggled to coordinate their efforts. Ukrainian forces faced pressure from Bolshevik troops, the Polish army, and internal divisions. By 1920, the UPR entered into an alliance with Poland against the Bolsheviks, but the subsequent military failures and the signing of the Treaty of Riga in 1921 partitioned Ukraine between Soviet and Polish control. The Ukrainian People's Republic government went into exile, marking the end of the independence movement, while the Bolsheviks consolidated their control, establishing the Ukrainian Soviet Socialist Republic by 1922 as part of the Soviet Union. During the early Soviet era, Ukraine experienced the policy of Ukrainization, which was aimed at fostering Ukrainian culture and identity within the framework of Soviet control. Implemented in the 1920s, Ukrainization promoted the Ukrainian language in education, media, and government as a means of gaining support for the Soviet regime among the Ukrainian population. This cultural revival allowed significant growth in Ukrainian literature, art, and intellectual life. However, this cultural development was carefully monitored by the Communist Party, ensuring it aligned with Soviet ideology. The policy ultimately facilitated a brief cultural revival but was soon suppressed as Stalin shifted towards a more centralized, Russian-dominated regime. The Soviet Union's introduction of the new economic policy, NEP, in the early 1920s aimed to stabilize the economy after the devastations of war and revolution. In Ukraine, the NEP allowed limited private enterprise and market mechanisms alongside state-controlled industries, giving peasants the ability to sell surplus produce. This led to some economic recovery, particularly in agriculture. However, large-scale industries, which were crucial for Ukraine's economy, remained inefficient under state control, contributing to ongoing tension between the Soviet regime and the peasantry. By the late 1920s, the NEP was phased out, marking the beginning of Stalin's drive for forced collectivization and rapid industrialization. In 1929, Stalin launched forced collectivization across the Soviet Union, including Ukraine. This policy aimed to consolidate individual farms into state-controlled collective farms, leading to widespread resistance, particularly from wealthier peasants or kuliks. The regime responded with brutal repression, seizing land and executing or deporting those who resisted. Collectivization caused agricultural disruption and food shortages, exacerbated by Stalin's grain requisition policies. The peak of this repression occurred in 1932-33 with the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions of Ukrainians. The famine, caused by the state's policies, remains one of the most tragic events in Ukrainian history and was denied by the Soviet government. The 1930s also saw the Great Purge, a period of political repression under Stalin. Ukrainian intellectuals, political leaders, and artists were targeted for their perceived nationalist sympathies or opposition to Soviet rule. Many were executed, imprisoned, or sent to labor camps. This period devastated Ukraine's cultural and intellectual elite, stifling intellectual progress and creating a lasting legacy of fear. The purges also affected ordinary citizens, with widespread arrests and executions, particularly in cities like Kyiv. During the early Soviet era, Ukraine experienced the policy of Ukrainization, which was aimed at fostering Ukrainian culture and identity within the framework of Soviet control. Implemented in the 1920s, Ukrainization promoted the Ukrainian language in education, media, and government as a means of gaining support for the Soviet regime among the Ukrainian population. This cultural revival allowed significant growth in Ukrainian literature, art, and intellectual life. However, this cultural development was carefully monitored by the Communist Party, ensuring it aligned with Soviet ideology. The policy ultimately facilitated a brief cultural revival but was soon suppressed as Stalin shifted towards a more centralized, Russian-dominated regime. The Soviet Union's introduction of the new economic policy, NEP, in the early 1920s aimed to stabilize the economy after the devastations of war and revolution. In Ukraine, the NEP allowed limited private enterprise and market mechanisms alongside state-controlled industries, giving peasants the ability to sell surplus produce. This led to some economic recovery, particularly in agriculture. However, large-scale industries, which were crucial for Ukraine's economy, remained inefficient under state control, contributing to ongoing tension between the Soviet regime and the peasantry. By the late 1920s, the NEP was phased out, marking the beginning of Stalin's drive for forced collectivization and rapid industrialization. In 1929, Stalin launched forced collectivization across the Soviet Union, including Ukraine. This policy aimed to consolidate individual farms into state-controlled collective farms, leading to widespread resistance, particularly from wealthier peasants or kuliks. The regime responded with brutal repression, seizing land and executing or deporting those who resisted. Collectivization caused agricultural disruption and food shortages, exacerbated by Stalin's grain requisition policies. The peak of this repression occurred in 1932–33 with the Holodomor, a man-made famine that killed millions of Ukrainians. The famine, caused by the state's policies, remains one of the most tragic events in Ukrainian history and was denied by the Soviet government. The 1930s also saw the Great Purge, a period of political repression under Stalin. Many were executed, imprisoned, or sent to labor camps. This period devastated Ukraine's cultural and intellectual elite, stifling intellectual progress and creating a lasting legacy of fear. The purges also affected ordinary citizens, with widespread arrests and executions, particularly in cities like Kyiv. These political repressions, combined with economic hardships and the trauma of the Holodomor, left a deep scar on Ukrainian society, contributing to a growing desire for independence that would emerge in the later years of the Soviet Union. Ukraine gained independence in 1991 following the dissolution of the Soviet Union, formalized through a referendum where over 90% of voters supported independence. The Ukrainian parliament declared independence on the 24th of August 1991, and President Leonid Kravchuk was elected in December 1991. The country faced significant economic challenges during its early years, with the economy shrinking drastically under Kravchuk and later President Leonid Kuchma, despite a recovery toward the end of Kuchma's presidency. Ukraine also introduced symbols of independence, such as the trident coat of arms and the blue and yellow flag, both rooted in the nation's historical identity. The 2004 Orange Revolution marked a pivotal moment in Ukraine's modern history, triggered by allegations of electoral fraud during the presidential election. Viktor Yanukovych, initially declared the winner, was defeated in a rerun of the election after massive protests in Kyiv. The victory of Viktor Yushchenko, who favored closer ties with Europe, led to tensions with Russia, particularly over issues like natural gas pricing. However, political division between Yushchenko and his former ally Yulia Tymoshenko weakened the government, paving the way for Yanukovych's return to power in 2010. Yanukovych's presidency saw attempts to centralize power, particularly through the controversial imprisonment of Tymoshenko, and growing discontent over his shift towards Russia instead of pursuing closer integration with Europe. This led to the 2013–2014 Euromaidan protests, after Yanukovych rejected an EU association agreement in favor of closer ties with Russia. The protests escalated into violent clashes, forcing Yanukovych to flee the country in February 2014. The interim government and new President Petro Poroshenko faced the challenges of a war in Donbas, where Russian-backed separatists declared independence in eastern Ukraine, and the worsening economic crisis. Ukraine's post-2014 path saw significant steps towards European integration, including visa-free travel for Ukrainians to the EU and the implementation of reforms. However, the country remained plagued by corruption and unresolved issues such as the annexation of Crimea by Russia in 2014 and ongoing conflict in the Donbas region. President Volodymyr Zelensky, elected in 2019, continued efforts for closer ties with the West. Despite immense challenges, Ukraine's efforts to join the EU and NATO were further solidified, and its national identity was increasingly framed in opposition to Russian influence. Ukraine declared independence from the Soviet Union in 1991, with over 90% of voters supporting the move. In the years following independence, Ukraine faced political and economic turmoil, including corruption scandals and economic decline under President Leonid Kravchuk and later Leonid Kuchma. However, tensions resurfaced under President Viktor Yanukovych, particularly in 2013 when he rejected a European Union association agreement in favor of closer ties with Russia, triggering the 2014 Euromaidan protests. This led to Yanukovych's ousting and a shift toward European integration. Following Russia's 2014 annexation of Crimea and the war in Donbas, Ukraine has worked toward greater ties with the EU and NATO, while also navigating internal challenges like corruption and political fragmentation. The country was further destabilized by Russia's 2022 invasion, which escalated into a full-scale war with ongoing international consequences.